Hello and welcome to Xigent's Ransomware Mitigating the Threat webinar. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lauren and I am the Senior Marketing Coordinator at Xigent Solutions, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. Today we have a really exciting webinar for you presented by Amos Asof, who is the Chief Security Officer and Senior Solution Architect at Xigent Solutions. Amos has nearly 20 years of IT experience, both running data centers and helping customers achieve IT efficiency through focused, practical use of technology. On the agenda today, Amos will be sharing his knowledge on ransomware, which is a topic that has become mainstream as we are constantly hearing about it in the news today. Today, he'll walk you through the risk of ransomware and how you can effectively develop and execute a disaster recovery and backup strategy to protect your business. At the end of the webinar, we'll announce who the lucky winner of the $200 Visa gift card is. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Amos.
Awesome. Thanks, Lauren. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome back to our second installment of our Master of Disaster webinar series. And today we're going to be focusing on keeping safe from ransomware, specifically using the Xigent Solutions Recovery as a Service. Before we get started and get into the details, we're going to level set and make sure that we're all on the same page. Our agenda is going to include looking at our risk vectors, what we can do to secure and protect using best practices, current data protection and recovery solutions. We're going to talk about why does Xigent use the Zerto product in our Recovery as a Service platform. Talk about recovering from an infection within just a few minutes, reducing that RPO down to something that's very handy for recovering that data quickly, and then talk about a real-world customer story using Zerto to recover from ransomware. So according to an article in Forbes earlier this year, there has been a huge increase in the amount of ransomware that's out in the wild. $209 million was paid. That was in Q1 of 2016. We, of course, know everything is going up from there. SonicWall saw around 3.8 million ransomware attacks attempted in 2015. That bumped up to 638 million in 2016. Less than half of those victims that were attacked were able to really fully recover from their data, that being whether the data was just gone completely, perhaps maybe they had to re-input the data. In some cases, they actually paid to have the encryption unencrypted, but never actually truly got their data back. We'll talk about that here in a little bit as to why that would happen. And it's estimated that CryptoWall 3.0 made about $325 million from U.S. victims in 2015. And the increasing and continued use of those attacks is really attributed with the ease of which these cyber criminals can make these huge sums of money. It's really in their interest to continue with the ransomware just because the money is easy. It's all over the news. I think everybody's probably seen it. The fact that you're here for this particular presentation today means you're aware of ransomware. And businesses and users are increasingly seen as the priority targets for these organizations because they're more likely to pay that ransom and to pay larger ransoms. Organizations with public-facing services, and particularly those in local government and healthcare, are often the favored targets. I think we've all heard of the Hollywood Hospital, Hollywood Presbyterian Medical Center. Back in February of 2016, they had that big infection that lasted for about 10 days. It affected multiple departments, and the staff had to go back to using pen and paper. A lot of CT scanning was affected, and they estimated that cost of just those CT scans at about $1 million a day. Eventually, the hospital did end up spending some money to recover. At that point, they paid 40 bitcoins, which was worth about $17,000 at that time in ransom. And it's not just a U.S. Problem as well. Here's an example from the BBC website. This threat is big enough to make worldwide mainstream news. And then, of course, there is the ransomware as a service that really came around at the end of 2015, early 2016. Over 160 active campaigns globally, projected to increase millions of dollars of revenue for those attackers. One of the items I didn't get put in this slide, though, was that Barracuda, their advanced technology groups, reported that a new ransomware campaign had about 20 million attacks in just the first day, and that this large volume attack seemed to come from the Vietnam area. Additionally, India, Cambodia, Turkey, Greece, those were all sort of the hotbeds for these attacks. So not just the U.S., it's becoming a very global phenomenon, and ransomware definitely does not discriminate. Most of the attacks are directed, though, at the affluent countries, as they're seen as more likely to pay. And when they do pay, they're willing to pay a higher amount. And of course, businesses are the focus rather than private users. The threat of ransomware is at the forefront of most businesses and their leaders' minds. That's why you're here today. It's not really kind of an if ransomware is going to get into your business, but more likely when. And so when we stop to analyze this, we need to look not only at recovering from such a virus, but also protecting all of our endpoints. And ideally, we don't want this in our network at all. So let's analyze this a little bit and see what we can do. So ransomware Trojans will search all the files and network file shares, and some are looking for targets to back up. Basically, it's going to target your file extensions and then encrypt them. As long as I can remember in IT security, the threats have always been there. This is a little bit different. These can and do get into your networks, and the result is the same, where you have to pay a fine or recover from another method. But these attacks are becoming more frequent as the hackers are making large amounts of money with very little risk to them, as they're so hard to find. Companies, again, are being targeted who have data-sensitive or reliant systems, which I would argue actually is, every company these days. We're all highly dependent on the data that resides within our systems. And the big thing is that hackers are making so much money from this. Why would they bother going with the typical credit card fraud when simply sending out a phishing email is so easily deployed and allows for payment to be done straight away through Bitcoin? This is just an easier, higher revenue source for them. And so we know the impact here is that some of our systems will be blocked or denied access, or even worse, you'll have unrecoverable data, and that means that the systems you're protecting will be unavailable and you'll have a service outage. So let's take a peek under the hood of what the ransomware process does, so that we know, you kind of have to understand what's happening in order to know how to protect yourself. If you're familiar with Last Line Labs, they dissected a crypto wall 4.0 payload to find out exactly what it does. And first, the victim is compromised by typically a phishing scam or some sort of other exploit kit to download CryptoWall 4. The binary is downloaded and executed. It could be hiding in something as common as a zip file, and then a script is executed, or maybe there's an attachment like a macro that you might get in one of your Word or Excel documents. It's then injected into your Explorer.exe process, where the ransomware's activities are meant to, achieve kind of a persistence and kind of hide its tracks, so that when you're looking at the file that's actually being executed, it looks as though it's a typical system process like Explorer.exe. It makes itself persistent. It's going to copy itself, maybe a registered run key, and the infected user should know that persistence, if it's successful, the encryption function is actually going to run again at the next reboot, because once that computer restarts and it's under a registered run key, it's going to run again. It does that by copying itself to that app data directory, maybe creating that registry entry that enables it to start on reboot, and then possibly terminating the primary malware process and deleting the original file. So the file that actually was the infection actually gets removed completely so that you have a tough time finding that it's there. Then we're going to inject into the service host cryptowall 4 code. Will do that. It will inject it into this process with increasing so that it can increase the privilege level of access to the compromised machine. And this allows it to be able to delete all of the available shadow copies with the end user really being prompted. You don't get that user account control popping up to say whether you approve of something or not. And then it looks for backups and for master file tables. It's going to download the public encryption key from the command and control server. The files are going to be encrypted with a random AES encryption, and the files are then, the RSA key is then used to encrypt that AES key. Typically, you get a display that this is how you find out that you've been encrypted. Ransomware is going to display in 3 different formats, typically a PNG file or an image file, a text file, and HTML. And that's mostly because the attacker is really wanting to make sure that A, you know what's going on, and B, you have the message so you know where to send the Bitcoin, you know what's going on. You don't just think that your computer is broken and you can't access things. They really need to make sure that the user knows what's going on and how to recover from this. Things to note about this is that really the only way to recover is to have access to that private key, which was used to encrypt. And that CryptoWall 4 actually excludes certain file extensions on your computer, doesn't encrypt everything, needs to make sure that the OS is still working, and obviously that the user has the ability to access those facilities where payments would be made, and to be able to get that private key. And then, again, the infected user should remember that a simple reboot of this system is not going to fix it. It's not going to remove what's there if the persistence was effective. So the real question is can this be broken? The bad news is that all the different variants of the ransomware, they really show no signs of becoming weaker. Things are only getting bigger, more prevalent, and if anything, they're becoming more intelligent. So that being said, the program is not perfect, and of course has flaws which can be exploited. Many security companies are publishing excellent white papers on the details of these attacks, and if you'd like to, a quick Google will find those for you. And they walk you through exactly how they work and give some suggestions on how to fix them. One example was a company that identified the CNC server, the command and control server that sends encrypted packets to get the encryption keys, and this can be isolated from getting those keys. In effect, you're sending the software into a loop, but the list of servers in the code itself changes, and that's difficult to keep up with. So if you're fast enough, you can actually remove the PC from the network during the install phase and then be able to save any data that would have been encrypted through a network share. And if you can block the code from downloading those RSA keys, then at the very least it's just going to go into that continuous loop. But in the end, this is a very difficult thing to do, especially at the size and scale that some of our customers are at, and the number of end users that they need to be paying attention to. And so really the bottom line is we need to have a good recovery strategy. So stopping infections. Entry points, all kinds of entry points these days. Web attachments or downloads, USB keys. One of the things that I heard about the other day was actually folks who were those vape pens that people use that actually get charged through a USB port, that those were coming with and actually had the ability to spread malware on them as well. Also BYOD, a user downloads something and then that turns out to be an executable. BYOD devices connecting to your network, those are a problem. And it's not really limited to just users, but also to IT staff, internal and external users. Maybe you have contractors who have some access. There's lots of different methods for delivering a form of the virus into your organization. And if it gets in, it's going to be infecting not only the local disk, but also any network shares that you may have mapped as well. So general recommendations to try and prevent this. One, we're going to try to secure these entry points as best we can. We're going to try to filter web traffic and block malicious sites, block malicious attachments, block users from certain IPs, which users really shouldn't have access to. Of course, you're going to want to scan all of your email attachments. Maybe you want to have all of your USBs scanned as well, or in some cases we have customers who restrict USB ports completely unless they are authorized by the IT team. BYOD, make sure that those are locked down on a separate network from your production systems. And in some cases, you might go as far as blocking web access on some of your virtual machines. So, turning off advanced IE, I'm as guilty of that as anybody. When you load up a new machine and you turn off that advanced IE security, should really be a no-no as far as allowing people to do that. But if you take away internet access to those NICs on VMs that are just being utilized within your network and don't need internet access, that's going to be a security measure as well. Next up, training users. That's going to be a big deal. Being aware of phishing attempts. One of the big ones is reading pop-up messages instead of just clicking through. We have a lot of customers who have found that they might have a pop-up message that says, do you really want to do this, or are you sure? And rather than reading it and understanding the consequences, they simply click OK and click through. So training is a big one. Obviously, everybody should have antivirus on all of their different devices, any sort of anti-malware, making sure that it's up to date and has the latest DAT files, and making sure that you, not just install it at the beginning, but also monitor it over time, that people aren't shutting it off, that it's not getting corrupted and turning off on its own. And restricting domain access. So the CryptoLocker viruses will infect anything on a machine that the user has access to. And in a large, sprawling AD environment, there are oftentimes a lot of people with admin and domain admin privileges that really shouldn't have them. And so if you get a domain admin that gets some sort of ransomware, that's going to be bad, because they're going to have a lot of access to a lot of locations on your network. You really shouldn't be doing any browsing or email while logged in as a domain admin, and making sure that you've got change control around this to prevent this from happening. Also, you make sure you have all the Active Directory software restrictions and policies in place. Lock it down as much as you can so you can turn off privileges for users who shouldn't be able to run certain types of files. And it's a lot of work, but it certainly is a more secure environment when you do it that way. And then, keeping up on the latest information that's available. Google is your friend in these cases, making sure that you're subscribing to Google Alerts, making sure that you're reading the latest IT industry news. And then finally, in your network, making sure that you're auditing your file shares. Remove and clean up any unnecessary file shares, and connectivity is a bad thing in this environment. If they don't need that connectivity, don't give it to them. Making sure that you're applying read-only permissions where that makes sense. We sometimes call that cold data. If you can't change that file, then neither can the ransomware. And so keeping read-only where possible is a good suggestion. Making sure your firewall ports are blocked, making sure you've got good policies, and then segmenting where you can, using VLANs to keep production systems limited so that if ransomware does get in, you're really limiting the impact. And then if you want to go an extra step, there would be the honey trap and alerting. Putting systems and devices out there, and if you do a Google for a PowerShell example, it's available. It checks the file share with read and write access. The script will check for every 5 minutes. But if a permission changes, this could be a key alert, and it's really a honey trap that is your first warning sign that something's going on, and will send you alerts on that. Problem is, there's still zero-day exploits. As much as we want to put in the latest and greatest antivirus, next-generation firewalls, we're filtering for everything we can. We are limiting permissions where possible. There's still ways for things to get in. These ransomwares are evasive, they're clever, and they're always looking for new weak points somewhere within your network. So what we need to do is protect your data. We need to plan to respond and have a plan and a process to restore. And paying the ransom should not really be an option. Some victims have paid the ransom and then received no decryption key. Others have paid once and then been forced to pay again. They find out that they're willing to pay that money, and so they say you have to pay one more time in order to get it. Responding and communicate, and also a plan to find the source, making sure that if it does happen, that you know where to shut that off, how to keep it from happening again, and then testing your data and testing your restores. You'll also want to know the root cause analysis to prevent it in the future. And after you fix the issue is, why did this happen, and how do we plan for it not to happen again? So what do we do? What's the typical data protection solutions? Nightly backups are still extremely common within businesses. That you probably all are still doing this, and it's a best practice to do. But sometimes there becomes new technologies out there that make things just a little bit better. Whether it's taking a snapshot of your hardware or of your storage, you can reduce some of your RPOs and RTOs. The big thing here is to make sure that you're paying attention when you hear about new technologies, is to really look into them and make sure that just because you're doing today what you've always been doing, that might not be enough. That looking into the new technologies that are coming out that have been proven over the more recent time as being a better quality way to restore your data, that's what you should be looking at. And that's really what we're going to be talking about here today is how does Xigent and our recovery as a service utilize the Zerto technologies in order to be able to reduce those RPOs and RTOs down to a small enough time where you're able to get your data back quickly. And sometimes, in some cases, your employees might not even know that you had a ransomware infection. All part of your BCDR plans that you're doing is looking at these new technologies. In those cases, implementing multiple strategies is really the way to go. We're not saying that you should remove or get rid of your nightly backups or even your storage replications. They all have their places, and they all have different ways that they can accommodate different types of disasters. We just want to make sure that we're utilizing the technology that will best suit the business to reduce the amount of money and the amount of time that you might be out. Big thing here is that data loss and downtime is what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to minimize the impact. So with the Xigent Recovery as a Service, what does this really allow you to do? We can roll back very quickly with little to no loss, and even use the same solution to recover multiple types of disasters. There are still times where you'll use a certain solution for a very specific reason, but the majority of these cases can take advantage of our XRaaS solution and give you the capabilities for all your disasters, including site failures, application failures across virtual machines, even a single virtual machine failure, or getting down to file level recovery from any of those particular virtual machines. Xigent's Recovery as a Service takes advantage of the latest technologies to revolutionize replication, and along with that adds in orchestration and automation and puts it all into one nice wrapper. How we do this is by changing how that replication is done using the Zerto product. Before Zerto came along, if you needed to replicate the data for disaster recovery, there was really only one way to do it at scale, and that was at the physical layer. and doing storage-based replication. And then you were locked in. You need to have 2 matching storage arrays between site, and you're still only just replicating the data. You weren't getting automation and orchestration, meaning you'd have to do that manually or purchase another solution, such as VMware's SRM. But with these new technologies, now we're revolutionizing that replication by moving it up into the hypervisor and including all the automation and all the orchestration in one solution. It can replace everything you were trying to do before in a simple-to-use solution that also removes that lock-in to that particular storage and made replication and recovery completely completely software-defined, and most importantly, simple. Along with these new technologies, you can take advantage of Xigent's expertise in these platforms, our recovery and our protection. The one thing that people frequently lose sight of is that during times when you need recovery, especially during a major disaster, things can be quite hectic. And having Xigent on your side to help with the recovery process, the people who have done this before, is going to save you a lot of time, energy, and effort, and give you a little more peace of mind that things are being taken care of. So here we show the full value prop on how you can evolve, not just protecting, how you can evolve and not just protect and recover. Using Xigent's XRaaS service that gives you a more resilience for your IT as it evolves, because first of all, you can change. Once you've removed that lock-in to your particular storage environment, you can be completely agnostic as to the underlying storage and the underlying hypervisor. You can take advantage of new technologies, maybe an all-flash array, for example. You can reuse hardware when some of it is being refreshed. You can try a new storage or hypervisor vendor. You can really do just about anything. You can maintain protection across those VMs, the storage, and the hypervisors, and minimize the impact to just seconds. You can test the recovery, and you can remove the risk by being able to prove that you can recover and go to any point in time. You can be able to recover in minutes to maximize your uptime and also be able to use the same software to consolidate multiple data centers and do migrations. This isn't just for disaster recovery only. And you can evolve and use Xigent's XRaaS to replicate to one of our clouds, giving you true physical diversity and separation in your data replication scheme. And with all these different use cases, you're going to simplify your IT and future-proof your environment, because now you have a hybrid cloud solution that allows you to easily consume all of these different services, different hardware platforms, storage, hypervisors, and clouds, all from a single solution. So how does the XRaaS virtual replication work? Well, this slide is designed to help you understand how you can recover with minimal impact and data loss. The first thing you need to do is install the virtual manager within your vCenter or even within your system center, depending on if you're running VMware or Microsoft's Hyper-V. It's a .NET installer. It gives you easy-to-use management interface with the orchestration and automation capabilities, and that virtual manager actually installs in minutes. There's no disruption and there's no downtime. Then data is replicated using the scale-out hypervisor-based VRAs, or the virtual replication appliances. They're deployed from the virtual manager, pretty small in footprint, single CPU, 4 gigs of RAM, just over 12 gigs of disk space, and an IP address is really all they need. Each of those are deployed on every hypervisor host that you are replicating to and from, and this allows for every protected VM to have a local replication appliance no matter where it moves around within a cluster. And that creates this scale-out architecture that means Xigent can protect your environment with the same software, whether you're a small shop, maybe you've got 3 or 5 or 10 virtual machines, or maybe you're a very large environment where you have thousands of VMs to protect within your environment. These appliances, the VRAs, have built-in compression for the replication of traffic and allow you to throttle it at different time periods throughout the day. and have resilience to WAN outages. So if a network link were to go down, they don't start storing a huge amount of data. They just keep an online index in memory of the most recently changed blocks of data, and then they replicate once the network comes back online. It's automatically self-healing. The VRAs are only replicating the virtual machine block level changes, performing real-time and continuous replication, and removing the need for any sort of scheduling. So this isn't your typical backup that runs once a day or once, or every 4 hours. If nothing is changing, then nothing is replicating between the two sites. And as soon as a block changes and is written, then it's asynchronously tracked and is sent to the recovery site with no snapshots and really no impact to the systems. The XRaaS service is always monitoring and tracking these writes and the order in which they were written in order to capture the recovery checkpoints that maintain this write order fidelity of the data without having to do those snapshots. You don't have to pause, and you don't even have to stun the VM. An example of that, a customer had a 5 terabyte Oracle database that they were using storage-based replication to replicate that database with snapshots, and they had that running every 4 hours with hot backup mode, and they were stunning the database, and they were absolutely killing performance, but they needed that amount of recovery. They needed at least every 4 hours. Moving to a hypervisor-based replication, they are now able to actually achieve an RPO of under 20 seconds. No backup mode is needed, no snapshots, no performance hit, and of course, only seconds of data lost when it comes time to recovery. The recovery site contains virtual disks for all the replica of the VM data and journals for the latest changes going back to 30 days. With compressed data, the typical DR site storage space required is the space for the utilized VM base disk and an additional 7 to 10% of the space for the journaling. Some customers have actually seen a savings of about 40% of their storage footprint using this method. They don't have to replicate the whole LUN, just the VMs, and they no longer need to take or store snapshots for point-in-time recovery. So consistency, protection, and recovery. The concept of the virtual protection groups, including the features and functionality that are contained within it. One key concept that we want to mention here is consistency grouping, taking the concept of placing all of the virtual machines on the same storage LUN in order to achieve data consistency between replicated virtual machines on that storage and applying that across all of your storage environment. Typically, you would take all of the VMs that belong to your enterprise application, so multiple VMs that are all involved in the single application, and you'd place them all on the same LUN. Then you'd snapshot that LUN, and you'd replicate it, and you'd recover that entire LUN, and all your VMs would be there from the same point in time. But what if you wanted to mix and match your storage or your LUNs for your VMs, but you still want to maintain that same data consistency between them? What if you wanted to replicate to one of our clouds? You can't do that with those traditional methods using storage replication across multiple arrays or even vendors. And so we take the replication and we move it to the hypervisor so it's no longer dependent on that storage replication. With the virtual protection groups, we protect the VMs together that you add to these VPGs and give them granular checkpoints with, again, that write order fidelity across the virtual machines and allow you to recover them together from the same point in time, regardless of where the data is stored. It doesn't matter what storage or LUN they're on. You can replicate from anything to anything. When you create those protection groups, you pre-configure all the settings, so things like network, security, different sizing, maybe prioritization, so it's all ready to go when you need to fail over. So now that we know how we architect the solution and kind of the details behind the scenes and how things work under the covers, how easy is it to mitigate the threat of ransomware? Well, let's take a look at what it takes to make this happen. So with Xigent's Recovery as a Service, it's actually going to be 4 simple steps. One you're going to, in the bottom right-hand corner there, you see the big red button that says Failover. You're going to click the Failover button. And this is, of course, post a disaster event, ransomware, or whatever other disaster you might have encountered. You're going to click Failover. You're going to then select the the applications or the VPGs, the groupings that you had created earlier. Could be just one of these, it could be all, it could be a subset. You see that there's multiple ones there. It's just simply a checkbox of the applications that you want to bring back. Then you verify the recovery settings and decide if you want to recover from the most recent checkpoint or a validated checkpoint further back in the past. So here you can see the most recent one came from 23, looks like that's 10/23/47. There was one previous to that, 10 seconds before that, and 10 seconds before that. You just go back in time before the disaster happened and choose that point in time that you'd like to restore from. And then you click the failover button and let Zerto do the rest. It's really that simple. And that is all your DR plan needs to contain in order to perform that failover. So we show you that. We show you the simplicity, the four items, the failover, select your apps, the verify, and then start. And in order to have you compare that to what you're doing today, if you had a disaster today, how many people would you have to get together, and how much would you have to do to orchestrate all of this, no matter what time of day, or for that matter, what time of night, and no matter the size of the environment you have, you're probably calling in your most skilled employees in each area in order to help you through this process to make sure that that recovery is a success. The knowledgeable resources are still on board, and hope that they are there and that they have transitioned their tribal knowledge for this particular process if they're no longer. We can actually do recovering of individual files and folders in minutes as well. So if you don't have a major disaster that takes down an entire system, an entire virtual machine, an entire data center, you can actually do individual files and folders as well. Using that same journal and checkpoints for restoring those files, you use the same one as you used to restore the VM or the group of VMs that we saw earlier. So once you have the restore request, you launch the wizard and select the VM you want to grab the files from, and click next. Look through your checkpoints and select the latest copy from all the previous points in time. Select all the files or folders you want to recover. This can be, a single file by itself, or you can recover a folder or even an entire database if you want to take that database offline, grab whatever you need out of the database, and then you can easily download, hit the download button, and the selections that you chose will download straight through your browser to your workstation, and it's really as simple as that when you're using the Zerto application. The one-to-many feature and keeping a replica of the VMs on your local site. These file level restores can transfer down at the speed of your local infrastructure as well. So Zerto is completely integrated with the hypervisor, and the key thing that I want you to notice here is that you can see across all of your protected VMs. You are shown them all in real-time RPO. You won't find another solution that's really going to show you this, let alone right when you log into the dashboard. So the question is, what is your RPO today? And you can go search through your interfaces and technologies and try to piece together your RPO and exactly how much data you would lose if you were failing right now. Zerto, it's all right here in the dashboard. Zerto will give you that real-time RPO across your site and for each virtual protection group, or those VPGs that we talked about earlier. And it doesn't matter what your environment is underneath the covers, you get that same interface all the time. And of course, you can do the same interface to perform and prove out your DR testing with reports generated and all available right through this same dashboard. So why would you use XRaaS or Xigent Recovery as a service? Why would you not do this yourself? You already know that we're using Zerto as the product under the covers to provide the incredibly low RPOs. As we have shown, it's relatively easy to use, easy to manage, and definitely easy to recover. Well, the problem is that when you run your own DR site, you've got the expense of power, the expense of cooling, real estate, hardware, all the networking that goes with it. Of course, you have to administer all of that as though it's a second data center, and then you have licensing and maintenance to go with that. Not only that, but you're sort of locked in. You're locked into a site for a period of time, and moving from that site whenever you want is not all that easy and or quick. Think about the effort it would take for you to move your existing data center to another location. Refreshes cost a lot of money and, of course, grow exponentially if you maintain even more than just one DR site. But with Xigent's recovery as a service, you're only going to pay for what you use, and you also have the flexibility to migrate there if you decide to in the future. You don't carry the cost of or the planning of hardware refreshes in our data centers. We take care of that. All of that is maintained by our staff, and you don't have to worry about that side. You can predict almost exactly what it's going to cost you for the year, month to month. You can even take advantage of experts that do all of the work for you. You can let them manage the infrastructure and even the actual DR event too. Remember, outages and recoveries bring along their own frustrations and stresses, and having us help you during those times will allow you to focus on other pressing events that you have to deal with. Many of our customers today, and probably several of you on the webinar today, have to adhere to some sort of compliance. Maybe it's PCI or Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, etc. One of the nice pieces from the Zerto Virtual Manager is that you can run these detailed reports that prove that you are able to recover how long it took, who did it, and what the outcome was. And you can use this against multiple regulatory compliance standards. So this sort of documentation, very helpful when it comes time to go through any sorts of audits or reviews. Let's do a quick customer story here. One is that, so a customer had an infection and then recovered. This is actually a screenshot from a mobile phone that the customer took, showing what the encrypted files that the user had ended up getting locked out of. The problem here was that the user had edit permission to these files, and in hindsight, of course, 2020, probably shouldn't have, but in this case, they ended up actually having access to files they shouldn't. Audits probably would have taken care of this, probably would have prevented this, as the users would have been removed from those files. But like I said, that just wasn't the case this time. It can and does happen to all of us. Users move, users leave, and Active Directory, doesn't get cleaned up quite as well as it should. And so from time to time, this sort of things happens. So what actually ended up happening was the customer isolated the PC from the network. They ended up, this was the original PC that actually ended up with the infection that encrypted the files that were on the network. They used the file recovery to recover those files from just a few minutes before it happened. And the key thing here was that there was no need to recreate the files, and there was no need to accept the data loss. And the big part was there was no ransom paid. They were able to bring their data back from just before it happened. And again, something you wouldn't be able to do with those nightly backups or even with those 4-hour replications. You'd have to recreate that data that has been missed since that last replication and or since that last backup has happened. So in this case, the impact was really minimized. It did turn out that the user was browsing the internet, and that's how they got infected, through a file that they pulled through a web browser, and then their file shares were infected. In the end, they found out through root cause analysis that there was a specific IP of a country that user probably shouldn't have access to anyway. There was no business purpose or business reason for the customer to be allowed access at the firewall. They were able to do some geofencing and stop additional potential threats from that same country IP range. This customer actually had this happen to them twice. The first time the source was not identified. They didn't quite go through all of the response they should have. Ended up happening again, and the second time they actually performed that root cause analysis and were able to stop it. But in both cases, they lost very little data. The ransom wasn't paid, and they didn't have to recreate any of those files or bring them back. So, in summary, Xigent Recovery as a Service. It's an enterprise-class software for disaster recovery that is hypervisor based, and it works in VMware and works with Microsoft Hyper-V, and is fully virtual aware. It's meant to protect to off-site secure data centers. Storage and hypervisor agnostic solution that allows you to minimize the impact of an outage and rewind an entire consistency group to the second in just a few minutes. You've got experts who can help you set up, configure, maintain, and most importantly, react when a disaster like ransomware occurs. And using the Xigent Recovery as a Service along with Zerto, it's a powerful data protection and recovery solution that installs in quickly. It's non-disruptive. It doesn't require you to maintain a second DR site, which would include things like hardware, software, power, and cooling. And it comes with trained and knowledgeable staff who are here to help you during those stressful times when you have many other things to worry about. So we want to thank you for attending our second in the Master of Disaster webinar series. There will be a third one coming up soon. Watch for that in your email. If you've got questions, feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you about Zerto and Xigent's Recovery as a Service. My contact information is there, as well as all of our information available at www.exigentsolutions.com. Once again, I want to say thank you.
Thank you, Amos. We hope you guys enjoyed the webinar. This webinar was recorded, so we'll be sending you a copy of the recording to you over the next couple of days. And now I'm going to announce the winner of the $200 Visa gift card, which is Brady Malloy. Brady, I will be reaching out to you personally after the webinar with more details. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day.